This is the story of two brothers. They were horses, and their names were Hobnobbin and Obnobbin. They grew up on a farm together, on the top of a large hill that overlooked a very long valley, and at the end of the valley was a cherry tree. And they were just young colts, just young little horses, when on the first day of spring, it was a beautiful spring day, the sun was coming up over the horizon, and the birds were singing, the air was fresh, the flowers were blooming in the farmer's garden because his wife had planted them there. And one day, that spring day, they decided that they would start to go for a race. They'd never done that before, but they decided, hey, let's go for a race. Hobnobbin said to Obnobbin, hey, let's go for a race. Obnobbin said to Hobnobbin, well, okay, I've never been there before, but we'll try it out. And so they started off. First down the hill at a trot. You know, they were just young little colts, just slowly at a trot. But as they started going down the hill and they got into the valley, they started picking up a little speed. It was Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, neck and neck now. Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, a little faster when they got around the cherry tree. Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin. They knocked over the cherry tree and they kept going. Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin Obnobbin, Hobnobbin. Hobnobbin won by a nose. Right, by a nose, okay? So Hobnobbin wins by a nose, and the years go on, and these two brothers keep at it. They picked back up the cherry tree, and they kept going. And it was kind of a tradition for these guys. Every evening, at sundown, at the end of the day, the two horses would make one race around the cherry tree, around the farmer's valley, up back into their little barn again up at the top of the hill. And so they would do it continually, these two brothers, as they were growing up. They would go on this little race, hobnobbin, 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 down the, first down the hill at a trot, mind you, hobnobbin, hobnobbin at a trot. But then when they got down to the valley, it was hobnobbin, 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 around the cherry tree, more carefully this time. Hobnobbin, 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 back up the hill again, hobnobbin, hobnobbin, hobnobbin. Hobnobbin won by a nose. Okay? So, one day, well, this had gone on for a long time, and one day, a visitor was over at the farmer's house. It's a jockey from the Kentucky Derby. And this was a few years back, oh, say 5 or 6 years ago, and this jockey was watching out of the kitchen window. And he saw these two horses racing, doing their regular hobnobbin, obnobbin thing, going around the, well, first down the hill at a trot, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin. But then, as they started going around the cherry tree, it's picking up a little speed again, hobnobbin, obnobbin. Hobnobbin was knocked over by Obnobbin, but then they picked themselves up back up again, they kept racing. Hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin. Hobnobbin wins, yet again, another time by a nose. So, well, this jockey is watching this whole spectacle from the kitchen window of the farmer's house. And the jockey is good friends with the farmer, and the farmer had fallen upon some hard times that year, and he says to the farmer, the jockey says, hey, I see those two horses out there, they look like some mighty fine racers. And so the farmer says to the jockey, well, okay, I tell you what, if you're interested in letting them run in the Kentucky Derby, then we'll go ahead and just sign these guys over to you. They would, the farmer kind of let the jockey rent the horses for a while, and while the race was going on, it was kind of the off season for the horses anyway. Who knows what else they did besides race. But anyhow, these two horses were signed up for the Kentucky Derby by this jockey. And so it became the day of the Kentucky Derby. All of the horses were lined up. Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, kind of far back in the stretch of the horses. But after a while, after the race really started off, they were picking up a little speed. Hobnobbin, Obnobbin were, and they managed to make their way past the crowd of horses and into the forefront, as they kept going. around the track, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin. And then finally, they managed to be the first and second place there, hobnobbin, obnobbin. They were heading toward the finish line at the Kentucky Derby. Hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, just like old times, just like when they were kids. Hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin. The final lap, the final stretch, hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin. All the rest of the horses were way in the back. Hobnobbin, obnobbin, hobnobbin, obnobbin. Hobnobbin crossed the finish line, and Hobnobbin won, yet again, by a nose. By a nose. So, Hobnobbin won the Kentucky Derby. They went back home. It was the last day of fall. The Kentucky Derby was over. The whole racing season was over for these horses. And it was the last day of fall, and the sun was setting. The sun was setting at the end of the horizon. The leaves were dying. The flowers had died long ago. The leaves were falling off of the trees, falling off of the cherry trees. And it was kind of a somber day. This was, actually I believe this was a few years after the Kentucky Derby. This was a few falls afterwards, because the horses were a lot older now. They were old brothers. They had seen it all. They had been together, neck and neck, hobnobbin and obnobbin, side by side, these two brothers. But Obnobbin was just a little bit sad that he had never won this race. It was a tradition, a ritual for them. They had done it for years. This race, Hobnobbin and Obnobbin, running across the field, back around the cherry tree and back up through the field again and up the hill and back into their little stable. And so they had always wondered what would happen if Obnobbin would win. So, Hobnobbin says to Obnobbin, I tell you what, brother, I've seen you this whole time come in at second place, and I think I'll just let you get a head start. Obnobbin says to Hobnobbin, are you really sure you mean it? And Hobnobbin says to Obnobbin, hey man, I mean it, you can have a head start. And so, Obnobbin takes off down the hill, at first at a trot, very slowly. But as he got down into the valley, he started picking up a little speed, and he was getting around the cherry tree. But then Hobnobbin took off down the hill, and then but by the time that they got up to the cherry tree, they were about neck and neck again. Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin. Now this whole time, I need to mention, there was this little dog sitting under the cherry tree watching the whole event, the whole spectacle take place here, this final race. This little dog was watching him, and Hobnobbin and Obnobbin were going around the tree. It was Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin. They were going back through the valley again. Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, 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 Hobnobbin, Obnobbin. Now, I mean, this was a lot more dramatic than what I'm saying here. This was Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, Obnobbin. Hobnobbin, Obnobbin, 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 Hobnobbin and Obnobbin, Hobnobbin and Obnobbin, Hobnobbin and Obnobbin, Hobnobbin, 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 Obnobbin. Hobnobbin and Obnobbin, 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 Hobnobbin won. Yet again, by a nose. Okay, so this bulldog, this little dog that was watching the whole event happening from under the cherry tree, he is breathtaking. He is just struck by this. And he goes up to these two horses. And he says, I can't believe you guys. I just can't believe it. Hobnobbin, you ought to be ashamed. You should have let your brother win that race, because I have seen him race you this whole time. I've been watching this whole time, ever since you were little colts. And I can't believe it. I don't know why you didn't let him win. Well, Hobnobbin looks at Obnobbin. And Obnobbin looks at Hobnobbin. And they say to themselves, well, what do you know? A talking dog. Well, what do you know? A talking dog.